and has a very broad experience in the field of fighting corruption. We are ready to listen to you, Mr. Kleridis. Please proceed to the podium. You have the floor for 12 minutes, and you may deliver your speech. 12 minutes. I can give you more if you want. Okay, thank you.
Madam President, distinguished speakers, dear participants, first of all, I would like to welcome the organizing of such an important conference in Cyprus and to thank the organizers and especially the Honorable MP Irini Charalambidis, Vice President of OSCE, Parliamentary Assembly and Special Representative for Fighting Corruption, for giving me the opportunity to be included in the panel of speakers. As you have heard in the introduction, I have had the honor, I would say, and the bitter experience to have been appointed and serve as the Attorney General of the Cyprus Republic for the years 2013 to 2020. The Attorney General, according to the Cyprus Constitution, is an independent officer of the Republic with unlimited powers in criminal cases, and at the same time, he is also the legal advisor of the Republic, of the President of the Republic, of the Council of Ministers, and of the Ministers of the Government, in exercising his functions as the public prosecutor. The Attorney General is vested with the unfettered power to initiate, continue, discontinue, or stay any criminal proceedings at his absolute discretion and in the public interest against any person in relation to any kind of offense, and he is not accountable for his decisions in this respect to any court in the Republic. It follows that the Attorney General is in effect the officer holding perhaps the most responsible position to fight corruption, in collaboration, of course, with other independent institutions. In view of this, I think that going through the real experience in trying to fight corruption when holding such a position, and by sharing with you the difficulties and hurdles we had to face, will be much more productive and useful rather than engaging in theoretical and academic rhetoric. Through this, one should also be able to draw conclusions which can form the basis for further consideration and perhaps reform. In my opinion, which is based on my experience, the existence of corruption can be attributed to the following factors: the inherent greed and the tendency towards the easily gained profits, together with the prevailing culture in our days as to the increased importance of having money with which one can buy almost everything. The economic crisis and the accruing crisis in ethical values and principles. The creation of circumstances which can easily be the subject of legal or illegal exploitation and abuse by persons to their own benefit. The lack of effective supervisory and investigating checks and controls. The elevation to key positions of persons not by using criteria of merit and qualification, but with extraneous criteria relating to party political considerations, to family or to business relations, etc. The insufficiency of legislative measures which could make the commission of white-collar offenses more difficult, and the absence of adequate measures which could facilitate the effective investigation and prosecution of criminal offenses. The tolerance, apathy, indifference, and lack of strong reaction by the ordinary citizen who has enormous power to exert pressure as against the phenomenon of corruption. And finally, the impunity. The time period of my term of office between 2013 to 2020 was marked by the banking and general economic crisis on the island. It is commonly accepted that in periods of economic crisis, corruption flourishes for reasons which are obvious. According to the European Commission's report on the rule of law situation in Cyprus for the year 2020, a total number of 120 corruption cases had been investigated or were under investigation, out of which 98 have been completed and 22 cases were still under investigation. 47 cases were pending for trial for corruption, or they were under trial. 37 persons were convicted for corruption, including the Deputy Attorney General, members of the House of Representatives, ex-ministers, mayors, members of town councils, and other public figures. The situation described above was unprecedented, at least as far as Cyprus is concerned. The development which gave the clear message that impunity was coming to an end is attributed to a great degree to the efficient work of the Auditor General's service. It was this penetrative and restless effort in auditing public funds which brought into light most of the relevant data and evidence which could enable the setting up of criminal charges against white-collar offenders. The combination and close cooperation of an independent and well-equipped audit service with a public prosecutor's office fully disengaged from any political or other extraneous considerations, ready and willing to act independently of who is involved in criminal activities, is, in my opinion, the best prescription for good results in the fight against corruption. It is a fact that on many occasions the Auditor General, who is present with us today, has been publicly accused for exhibiting extreme zeal in executing his duties, that he causes fear and he is exerting pressure upon civil servants. This might be well so, but this is a much preferable situation than having the public servants feeling at ease and being under the impression that they could get away with any wrongdoing, as it was the situation prevailing in previous years, during which the results of all the audit work of the Auditor General and his reports remained untapped in the drawers of ministries' desks. The Auditor General was also accused for allegedly exceeding his duties and jurisdiction, and on many occasions he was directly or indirectly threatened with filing a recourse before the Supreme Court, which is the appropriate court, for his dismissal for alleged gross misconduct in that he has exceeded his powers. Political parties had to take sides on that issue, inevitably, with the result that purely audit matters became the subject of political differences. Such an unpleasant situation constitutes a direct threat against the independence of this vital institution, and it gives the wrong messages to the ordinary citizen. As I have pointed out earlier, the close cooperation between the legal service and especially of the public prosecutor with the audit authorities is absolutely necessary in order to be effective in the fight against corruption. And when we are talking about the legal service and audit service, we have to emphasize that what we have in mind is two fully independent services, services with their own independent budget and with the power to appoint its employees away from any procedures of the civil service. Unfortunately, this is not the situation prevailing now at present in Cyprus, where efforts towards achieving this aim were not met with success up to now. Although the combating of general financial crime during the last few years is considered to be a success, the same cannot be said about malpractices in the banking sector of the economy. It is true, of course, that for the first time ever, following police investigations aided by external experts, for example, forensic accountants from abroad, high officials of banks, including members of the board of directors and CEOs, had been charged in criminal courts with various offenses regarding mainly stock exchange misdoings. The results, however, were poor, very poor, and disappointing. The main reasons for this are the following. A, the lack of expertise and experience in investigating financial crimes by the police investigators. We don't have a special SFO department or something similar. B, the lack of expertise and experience in prosecuting financial crimes by the prosecutors. C, the lack of adequate staff in the law office which could successfully undertake the legal battle in the courts as against the teams of well-qualified and experienced defense lawyers appointed by the defendants. And D, the lack of knowledge and experience of judges in order to deal with difficult and complicated banking matters. All the above-mentioned deficiencies must be gradually rectified if we wish to see better results in similar future situations. Another serious issue which does not contribute to the desired degree towards the aim of preventing or fighting corruption is the behavior of the press or the mass media. The role of the press in fighting corruption is very substantial indeed. Unfortunately, however, some of the mass media, at least in this country, do not enjoy the necessary independence and freedom to act so as to take a firm stand and support efforts to fight corruption. The following are the reasons for this. A, certain mass media are either directly or indirectly controlled or influenced by political parties. As a result, they tend to be selective in the sense that in cases of corruption in which persons belonging to the party they support are involved, they will keep silent or cover or suppress the story by minimizing its impact and seriousness. If they are pro-government, they will be prepared to suppress or to minimize the impact of all economic and corruption cases committed by members of the ruling party. If they are now against the government and in favor of the opposition, they will overexpose and maximize scandals and corrupt practices by organs of the government. B, there are no real and effective procedures through which the authorities can check and verify which person or persons are hidden behind the officially declared owners, shareholders, directors of mass media. We have come across cases in which shareholders are holding majority shares in trust for and on behalf of persons involved in corrupt practices. We have come across cases in which generous economic support is given to mass media in exchange of them engaging in a fierce and daily attack against independent institutions. C, in cases where banking institutions are involved in economic scandals or even in wrongdoing, which adversely affect the state economy, most of the mass media will suppress or underexpose these stories, and of course, any criticism for the banks, for the simple reason that the annual income they receive from the bank's advertising programs and schemes annually is too high to risk losing it. Generally speaking, the efforts to prevent corruption and conflict of interest, as well as the fight against both, cannot and should not be limited and considered as exhausted by the taking of stricter legislative measures. It is, of course, always useful and absolutely necessary to have comprehensive and detailed pieces of legislation which aim at hindering and prohibiting every kind of corruption or conflict of interest. All these obligatory provisions which bear criminal sanctions are, of course, capable of operating as hurdles in the way of corruption. Unfortunately, however, these measures do not suffice. We must always have in mind that all these good laws are not only made by people, but they are also put into force by people. They are put into force by people in key positions who are appointed or elected to their posts. It follows, therefore, that special care should be taken regarding the appointment of well-qualified and honest persons in key positions, and their appointment must be proposed or ratified by independent bodies, like parliaments. And the electorate should exercise extra caution in employing the proper criteria for selecting persons whose integrity cannot be doubted in order to serve in key positions with powers and functions which affect our lives. In concluding, I would like to say that the above facts, which are both disturbing as well as disappointing, stemming from experience, should in no way hinder or slow down the efforts to combat corruption. On the contrary, they should operate as strong reasons for the strengthening of our decisiveness with which we must continue the fight. Cheap excuses, like we are doing the best to pass better legislations, or that corruption is a global phenomenon, etc., should in no way ease down the continuing fight, which must be fierce and merciless. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Kleridis. An extremely interesting speech, and as a journalist myself, I can think of some head titles. I already see Frank and Drew smiling, so I think they share my approach. Thank you, Mr. Kleridis. In this session, we will also benefit from the experience of investigative journalists. Our next speaker is Mr. Drew Sullivan, OCCRP editor of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Mr. Sullivan, we acknowledge the key role that the media are playing in combating corruption. And we would be really interested in knowing how have successive scandals that the media have brought to light impacted the anti-corruption efforts? What obstacles have you been facing? How can the media protect themselves from undue influence, and what can national parliaments do? We are really interested to hear your speech. You have 12 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to the Cypriot government and to OSCE for having me here. A man was driving on a high mountain road with a sheer cliff on one side. And as he's going around a particularly tight bend, there was a truck coming in the opposite direction at high speeds. They barely could fit by each other. And as they passed, the truck driver yelled at the driver, "Pig!" The driver got angry and shouted back immediately, "Jerk!" Grumbling to himself, he went around the corner and promptly hit a giant pig in the middle of the road. This is how we feel as journalists sometimes. We try to help, but we're often called a jerk. Our job as investigative reporters is to do something that people don't often like, and that's to tell the truth. What we often have to do is just tell the truth and run. We're not supposed to tell you as governments what to do or how to run the government, although I admit sometimes we do. We don't have all the solutions to the problems that we raise, although we often quote people who do. Our real job and value is to understand the problems, clearly explain them, and hold accountable those who create and exacerbate them. Our job is not to trust you. It's really not to trust anyone. One of the lessons I teach my young journalists is, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. Verify. You need us as we need you. We should work together better. A free and independent press is the cornerstone of any democracy. I know of no robust democracy in the world that does not have a free and unfettered press. On the opposite side, I know no autocracy, no dictatorship, no authoritarian monarchy that has one. They are inextricably and inversely related. That means, really, journalists serve as canaries in a coal mine. If we are dying, it's likely that democracy is dying in your country. A captured media is the first step to a captured state. We've seen it in even European countries, and reference the previous speaker with his experience. I know I've lived in Eastern Europe for 20 years. Unfortunately, I've seen this happen time and time again. A modern captured state is the newest innovation in bad government, but they are brought about primarily through corruption. They are in many ways the ultimate goal of organized crime and corrupt political parties. The reason we see captured states in such numbers is because of a perfect storm of factors that started back in 1989. That's when the Berlin Wall fell. It's also when the internet was invented, and the global services industry started to take off and take advantage of both. With the fall of the wall, it unlocked trillions in assets that fell into the hands of emerging kleptocrats. The internet allowed for easy-to-use global commerce. The new industry that was born, which we call the enablers, or at OCCRP, the criminal services industry, has become dominant. They are the banks, the law firms, the offshore registration agents, hedge funds, which are often unregulated, golden visa purveyors, and they immediately started to service this new class of kleptocrats. And what they did together is globalize organized crime and corruption in a way that we had never seen before. And if you look today, many of those people from the criminal services industry are politically powerful and financially powerful. They allowed a regional minister in some remote country with nothing but audacity and greed to plunder his ministry, buy a London apartment, set up an American hedge fund and fund it, and all of this hidden behind offshore BVI companies operated by Panamanian lawyers and run with Latvian bank accounts. It's truly a breathtaking thing that they've done. It's globalized corruption. Many of us saw this happening, and we did nothing. I mean, it's not harming anybody, really, is it? Wrong. Opaque money is opaque power. The money was not only profoundly undemocratic money, it was positively plutocratic. Today, we can thank this dark money, along with libertarian billionaires, for things like Brexit and an increase in extremist parties, and the rise of plutocratic laws which have exacerbated social and economic injustice. So why are investigative reporters important? Well, because individual governments don't often have the consensus or the tools to stem global problems. Look at climate change and COVID. Governments can't do that. Their authority ends at the borders, and we know that international collaboration is not always what it should be. Police, who are directly responsible for crime and corruption, must file mutual legal assistance treaties, or MLATs, to get information from their neighbor. And as someone who has filed MLATs will tell you, they don't work so good. The average fulfillment time is about 2 years. Do you know what the average usage time of an offshore company by an organized crime gang is? About 6 months. So by the time the MLAT goes through, that company has been closed for almost 2 years. Okay, we report on these issues. We are really the only natural predator that global crime and corruption have. Only networks can track criminal networks, and that's what we do. OCCRP is a global investigative reporting network with journalists in 70 countries and in all continents of the world. We publish more than 125 major investigative projects a year, all aimed at this globalized crime and corruption. You know the names of our stories: Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, the Azerbaijani and Russian laundromats. These have been responsible for peeling back the levels, the layers of hidden layers that have prevented people from seeing what's going on. It is really, we are in the midst of a golden age of collaborative cross-border reporting. All these oligarchs' assets that you are now running, we've been reporting on those for about 15 years. The former head of the FBI's kleptocracy branch said at a meeting that I attended that 50% of the cases of the kleptocracy branch came from investigative reporting news stories. When done correctly, it can have a tremendous impact. OCCRP itself has been responsible for $7.7 billion in seizures and fines of bad actors around the world. That's a 50,000% return on the investment in the organization. We've been responsible for more than 600 arrests, indictments, and sentences, 370 investigations, 140 sackings, and thousands of other actions, including law changes, corporate actions, and civil society actions. And we've been responsible for the overturning of about 5 governments. And that's just one organization. Just think about that for a second. For every dollar you invest in us, we bring back $500. You should support us just if you need a means of raising money for your governments. But instead of being showered with money, we are often attacked. I've had colleagues and employees who have been murdered, jailed, harassed, surveilled, slandered by government media. I personally have been called a spy, a CIA agent, an FSB agent, a Mossad agent. At least there's a variety there. An organized crime figure, an agent of dark influence. Russia has declared OCCRP an undesirable organization. It is illegal for Russians to deal with us on any level, or they could face jail time. My organization is currently being sued 3 times, including twice here in Cyprus, ironically. Our colleagues at another organization have been sued up to 10 times. They're currently being sued 10 times, all by organized crime figures and government officials close to the president of the country. It's called the SLAPP lawsuit, and it's something that the EU is doing a lot of work on right now, and we strongly encourage that strong SLAPP legislation be put in place. SLAPP legislation protects people in that if it's not a SLAPP suit, it just allows a court to decide if a case is really a SLAPP lawsuit or if it's not. And that protects us against the multiple lawsuits. Unfortunately, because organized crime is globalized, often when we're writing about Azeri or Russian or even Kazakh persons, we can be sued in places like London and Switzerland and other countries. And that's what makes it so dangerous to us. Laws have been written to restrict, defund, regulate, and control us. So the question I ask is, what have parliaments done recently to actually help investigative reporting and organized crime, against organized crime? What have we done to help the media lately? It's not something that we normally go out and protect, but media is far more fragile than people realize. The advent of the internet has decreased advertising funding almost by 70% among some media. There's a chronic problem. There's not a model for journalism to make money nowadays in many places. And consequently, that's why we've seen the advent of nonprofit media. But it's very important that even with this situation, that governments work to create an environment in a country where media can prosper, can be profitable, and grow. It's a public service that provides great good to a country and is a key ingredient in democracy. And so we must find more ways to protect it. Meanwhile, we're going to continue doing our job. We'll continue to out corruption and organized crime wherever we find it. And we continue to grow every year as a nonprofit organization. So we hope that we can work with you in the future on these positive things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. It was really interesting to listen to what you had to say. But may I ask, because I'm a journalist myself and I'm quite curious, I would like to know who took legal action against you from Cyprus. Can you please say who took legal? Yeah, it would be really interesting. I would like to know. And I don't want it off the record. I want it on the record. Yeah. Yeah, please open that. Yeah, and press the button. Thank you.
Well, one of the lawsuits, the person has passed away, Mr. Neonucleus, the lawyer, and there's another lawyer, and I can't quite remember the name.
So all the lawyers?
Well, yes, they're lawyers, yes.
They are lawyers?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mr. Franz Wild, editor of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism's Enablers Project. Mr. Wild, you have the floor for 12 minutes. Thank you. And may I ask the speakers to give a copy of their speeches to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm an investigative journalist based in London. And I've got a story about one of your countries, which I'll tell you at the end. But first, a heartwarming story. On the 30th of April in 2013, on an Airbus A330, 217 wedding guests landed in the beautiful country of South Africa for a glamorous wedding. It was friends and family and political acquaintances of the Gupta family, who were very close to the president, Jacob Zuma, at the time. So far, so good. There was one problem. They were landing at a top security military base, which was absolutely inaccessible to civilians. Nevertheless, there was a blue light brigade waiting for them, and they were whisked off to the wedding venue. They had one little problem. A local reporter had been tipped off, and he was waiting outside the Air Force Base, and he went straight on the airwaves and blew the story wide open. That set off a chain of events over the next few years, which ended in the president being toppled, and the Gupta family having to leave the country. They are still quite safe, actually, in Dubai. But what I'm trying to tell you is journalism matters. It's very simple. I work for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Like OCCRP, we're a non-profit. We're funded by all kinds of people. There is absolutely no connection between funders and agenda. We set our own agenda. We report on deforestation. We collaborate with partners in Brazil. We worked on racketeering around the COVID crisis. We worked on the unequal distribution of vaccines. And I personally work on corruption, everyone's favorite subject here. And specifically, I look at London and how London and the UK are a real center for global corruption. Lawyers, bankers, PR agents, everyone loves to come to London. But I don't need to tell you that each of your country has its own enablers industry. The way we work is we publish with partners. So We published with the New York Times, with the Guardian, with the BBC, with Spiegel, and with publications all around the world. In Zimbabwe, for example, with Hawks. As Drew said, the business model for journalism is not sustainable. And so we rely now on non-profit organizations to drive this agenda. It's not just Jacob Zuma who was held to account by the media. There's a global corruption scandal under the umbrella term Unaoil, which was a company which was found to have paid vast bribes in many countries around the world. Glencore. 11 years ago, I was based in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And me, as well as other people, started writing about the curious relationships Glencore had with some of its business partners in the Congo. It took a while, but 11 years later, they pleaded guilty to 7 counts of bribery in the UK just this week. And they agreed to pay more than $1 billion. I mean, just on Drew's point, most of that money is actually going to the US and the UK and not to the countries where the bribery was committed. That's a story for another day. But you can see that journalism matters, and it's important to support it. One last example, there was a German payment company which is listed on the stock exchange called Wirecard. It was actually a British publication, the Financial Times, that first started exposing suspected fraud at the company. This was a vast conspiracy. The reaction in Germany was complete denial. Prosecutors in Germany charged the journalists with market manipulation. Fast forward, the journalists have been cleared, and actually the CEO was charged. It turned out the journalists were right, just this once. That's a joke, by the way. As Drew said, our colleagues around the world are murdered, arrested, harassed. There is very little in the way of support. I'm lucky. I'm from Western Europe, you know, free press and all that. Well, yes, to a certain extent. Last week, I got a letter from a large American law firm that many of you will be familiar with, threatening to sue me for an article I published concerning a Central Asian dictator, let's call it. Now, let me explain how this article came about. Or let me explain the facts in the article. Every story, every article we publish is verified by an independent fact checker. After I got the letter, we had another fact check. We haven't found a single mistake. There is nothing wrong. But I now risk losing my home, losing my profession. And I'm lucky. My organization supports me. It's expensive. All this time I'm dealing with this problem. I'm not looking at other stories. I'm not working on exposing the next corruption scandal. The problems are quite, or the state of legislature in each country is different. It's quite difficult because all of you are from different countries. Each country needs to push the agenda. If you think about how many members from each parliament are actually here, it's a fraction. Often, each parliament will have one champion, like Iran with her whistleblowers bill. And the onus is upon individuals to drive that agenda and to push it. In the UK, there are 2 or 3 who really persistently push that agenda. And it is possible. To cut to today, we often think we've got bigger problems. The Russian attack on Ukraine, for example. Well, here's the thing. You cannot understand those dynamics. You cannot understand autocracy without understanding corruption. It's a national security issue. So if you don't have strong enough anti-corruption laws, I mean, why is it 2022 and we're still talking about lobbying registers, public company ownership registers? And by the way, that's not sufficient. There needs to be enforcement. There needs to be funding of enforcement. The UK, which is considered a modern developed democracy, spends about £60 million on its top white-collar crime enforcement agency. One of the companies that it's investigating has spent $400 million on legal bills over a number of years. How do you think any prosecutor is going to achieve anything if it doesn't have the resources to do so? I understand as an MP, as a member of parliament, you've got your constituency, you've got your party political issues, then you've got the global issues, social issues. Probably don't have time to think about corruption. But I hope that it's clear that there's a connection between this and all the other issues. It always falls down. Look at the reaction by the EU, for instance, to the Russian aggression on Ukraine. One of the first things they did was sanction all the oligarchs connected to Putin. Well, that's an admission, isn't it? Funny they didn't see it coming earlier. A final thought, and I do really want to thank Irene and our generous hosts for really holding a wonderful couple of days. It's been great to meet everyone. But there was a documentary we watched recently, which I think caused a real storm here, and forced the resignation of the Speaker of Parliament in Cyprus because of his connection to a golden visa scandal where investments, were linked to corruption. It was shown that convicted criminals were able to obtain an EU passport if they paid enough money to the right person. My question is, where is this ended? Where are the real consequences? I'm sure he's out of a job, possibly income slightly reduced. Let's go back to Glencore briefly, the biggest commodity trader in the world with a presence in every country. The top staff, the chief executive and others, became billionaires when they listed on the stock exchange. They all had to leave the company. Tough life in Switzerland, possibly. But if you look at the enforcement action against the company, nothing has taken, there is no individual accountability. And you don't really hear any politicians demanding more. Thank you.
Thank you. I might say I've got some answers for you. We are still putting some pressure, and we expect prosecution on the mentioned story with Al Jazeera. Personally, I was quite offended because I've been targeted by the President of the Parliament because I insisted on transparency. And after this video came out, I refused to enter this room, and I told my party team that if you want to go, go, but I will not. And then, thanks God, they made him resign because he didn't want to resign until we had a result whether the prosecutor would find evidence against him. But this was unacceptable for the Cyprus Parliament, so the party leaders talked to him and they forced him to resign. Now, as far as the second part, you mentioned about the golden visas passport. I was very disappointed when I found out that the Bar Association fined some of those law offices with amount of money like 50,000 and 75,000, and this is nothing when you get millions out of these transactions. And I really like to thank both journalists for being so straightforward and true about the facts, because the journalists really, really suffer when they do their job properly. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Odysseus Mikhailis, the Auditor General of the Republic of Cyprus, who I might say he has been attacked by the system many times because he insists on doing his job the right way. And people who do their job the right way often have to deal with problems. Mr. Mikhailis is regularly invited to contribute to discussions held at the level of House Standing Committee meetings, exercising their oversight role. He's going to speak about the importance of safeguarding the independence of supreme audit institutions. Mr. Mikhailis, you have the floor for 12 minutes. And we have tabled a bill for the financial autonomy of the General Auditor's Office, but until now, no news, and this is bad news.
Thank you, Irini. Esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my gratitude to the organizers, the President of the Parliament of Cyprus, Mrs. Anita Dimitriou, and of course to the Vice President of OSCE, Mrs. Harlambidis, who had the inspiration for this event and for inviting me to give this speech. Thank you, Irini. Cyprus' most alarming problem concerning corruption is the rapid deterioration that has been recorded in the last years. Independent institutions and media, therefore, have a very critical role to play to stop and, if possible, reverse this very dangerous trajectory. We are the Audit Office of the Republic of Cyprus, meaning that we are the so-called Supreme Audit Institution, SI, as it's well known. And we are members of INTOSAI, the International Organization of Size. The audit of financial management appeared almost simultaneously with the organization of man in societies as early as the 3rd millennium before Christ. Commercial laws and audits appear in Babylon. Also in Egypt, in the days of pharaohs, there are accounts of inspectors who recorded the import and export of cereals. It was a very basic form of auditor. However, the concept of financial audit and control was crystallized and took the form that it has today. In ancient Athens, almost 2,500 years ago, where it was one of the most important institutions of the Athenian democratic state. Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, summarized the basic principles of auditing as a means of public accountability. The two basic auditing principles mentioned by Plato are still in force: transparency, and of course the independency of the auditing body. Thousands of years later, in 1789, the need for accountability of those who govern was acknowledged by the French revolutionaries when they drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, as it's called. Amongst the 17 articles that set out the so-called natural and inalienable rights, Article 15 deals with accountability. Nowadays, the concept and establishment of audit is integral in public financial administration, as the management of public funds represents a trust. Audit is an indispensable part of a regulatory system, the aim of which is to uncover violations of the principles of legality, efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. That's what we call the 3 E's: economy, efficiency, effectiveness. INTOSAI, besides providing support to SAIs, also sets standards for public sector audit. The most fundamental standard is the so-called Lima Declaration that was adopted in 1977 in Lima of Peru, and it is considered to be a kind of a Magna Carta of government auditing. The second most important standard is the Mexican Declaration. The Mexico Declaration was adopted by INTOSAI 30 years later in 2007 in Mexico and sets out the 8 core principles on SAI independence. You can see these 8 pillars in the chart, but I'll come back to that later. It is important that the importance of these 2 declarations is manifested by the fact that they have been recognized by 2 resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly in 2011 and 2014. I underline the fact that they constitute part of acquis communautaire. Let's focus again on the principles we set out in Mexico Declaration. This is the gist of the proper functioning of SAI. Please have a look at pillars 2, 4, 5, and 6. The head of the SAI shall not be threatened in the normal discharge of his duties. Also, the SAI shall have unrestricted access to information, the right to prepare reports, and the right to decide when the report will be published. Well, let's see what happened when we decided in July 2019 to carry out an audit regarding the implementation of the so-called Cyprus investment program. That was mentioned by Franz Waltz 2 minutes ago. That is mostly known as the Golden Passport program or scheme. There was a delayed response of several months by the executive following our request for data and information regarding the foreign nationals who had acquired golden passports and the list of law and accounting firms that had acted as intermediated providers. Then, in November 2019, an investigative committee was appointed by the Council of Ministers. We waited for some more months for them to complete their job, but as time was passing, we decided that we could not wait any longer, and so at the end of August 2020, that is 13 months later, after we had asked for the data information, we expressed our intention to initiate an audit in the premises of the Ministry of Interior. We managed to gather the files of only 5 applicants, and then, all of a sudden, the Council of Ministers decided to appoint another investigative committee, and the Attorney General, at that time, it was not Mr. Klerides that is here with us today, but his successor, decided that our audit should not take place while the committee was performing their investigation. So the government refused to provide us with access to any information. Nevertheless, we managed to complete the audit regarding the 5 applications that we had in hand. We issued the first report on 24th September 2020. The findings were very negative. We highlighted the abuse of power by the Council of Ministers. We indicated that the granting of golden passports to the spouses of the applicants could be a Trojan horse for criminals to acquire citizenship through their spouses. It was proved later that Mr. Kleridis, who was Attorney General back to 2015, at that time had given warnings to the government that what they were doing was illegal. What they do? They just simply ignored him. And the well-known reportage that Irini mentioned before of the foreign television network Al Jazeera that followed our report confirmed our findings. The undercover journalist that presented himself as the representative of a rich Chinese businessman was informed that in case there was a problem with his application, his wife could make the application instead, and his case could easily follow without any obstacles. Subsequently, by using data from other sources, we managed to perform an audit on the granting of citizenship of 64 persons related to a Belarusian company established in Cyprus. We are still facing huge difficulties with our audit due to the refusal of the government to give us access to the files kept at the Ministry of Interior. However, by using other sources of information, a new report was issued by us at the end of November 2020. What followed was threats for my dismissal. Mr. Kleridis mentioned something about that. For those who do not read Greek, this means they are asking for Odysseus' dismissal for misconduct. There were even references in the media that a criminal procedure was about to be initiated against me. In other words, there were threats that I would be sent to jail. Fortunately, when we referred the issue to Nicosia, our organization, they issued a very supportive statement, and soon after, the Conduct Committee of European Union size released a very strong statement calling the government to step back. After that, the whole issue came to an end, let's say happy end. It was proved that EU and Nicosia protective measures for SAI independence are effective. Well, let's see now about who is responsible for the prevention and detection of fraud. It should be noted that the prevention of fraud and corruption and their discovery is neither the responsibility nor the primary focus of the work of an external auditor, as SI. The primary responsibility for the prevention and detection of fraud rests with those charged with the governance and the management of the ODD, in our case, with the executive. If the auditor identifies a fraud, the international standards on auditing require the auditor, it's not a choice, it's a requirement, to communicate these matters in a timely manner to the appropriate level of management. The auditor should also determine whether there is a responsibility to report the occurrence or suspicion of occurrence to the prosecuting authorities. With which, as Mr. Kleridis stressed before, the cooperation should be very close in order to see perpetrators sent to jail. You all understand that fraud and corruption thrive when transparency and accountability are absent. SAIS, being a fundamental institution for promoting transparency, contribute to the prevention of fraud through transparency and the created fraud alert. Well, what about the relationship of SI and the Parliament? According to Lima Declaration, the independence of SAIS shall guarantee a very high degree of initiative and autonomy. SAIS report their findings to Parliament directly or sometimes, as the case in Cyprus, through the executive. The reports shall be published, and this will ensure extensive distribution and discussion. And of course, this brings to the surface the role of the media and journalists in the fight against corruption. That's something that I'll come back later. In 2017, OECD issued a paper that deals with the relationships between size and parliaments, which are the two most important players for holding governments to account. You can see the so-called accountability triangle. The foundation of the relationship between size and parliaments are the audit reports that size sent to the parliament. The establishment of good working relationship between size and parliament is very important in order to increase the attention parliaments pay to size reports. SAIs have the responsibility to produce high-quality reports, but parliamentarians like you also play an important role in the utilization of SAIs report. A parliamentary audit or accounts committee, usually known as a public account committee, is one of the methods parliaments can choose for dealing with SAIs report. So now let's go back to the role of the media. The media is a fundamental channel for keeping citizens informed of the SAI's role and of their reports, and also to safeguard transparency, which, as we saw, is a lethal weapon against corruption. Drew Sullivan, just before, explained, of course, the vital role of the investigative journalism reporting. This is also very important. So it is important that the audit message is well and effectively communicated, and the burden lies on the shoulders of journalists. Could the media play a negative role? Could they act in a way as to disregard the SAI? Of course, they could. Should they? I think it's their choice, and they are absolutely free to act as they like. Could they be offensive and shameless? That's me. Sorry to be naked. Could they be obsessive? In some cartoons, you may have noticed also the Honorable Mr. Kliridis, the ex-Attorney General, who was also very often satirized, like I was, and was systemically the victim of obsessive criticism. So, I think let's leave behind the unpleasant moments and return to the cases where the media play a positive role in the accountability framework. Previously, we saw the accountability triangle. I put it in a smaller scale of it on the left side of the slide. In this triangle, citizens, of course, are not mentioned, but the parliament we deem that represents the citizens. For this to be true, the media plays a key role. So effective media contributes to the successful functioning of the accountability system. The larger scale figure shows the interaction of the media with citizens, the executive, those that have the power, and also the accountability institutions, like courts. Free and independent media is the fourth cornerstone of a democracy. That's what Drew Sullivan said a few minutes ago, and of course I fully agree with him. An independent media sector is conceptualized as one part of a system of accountability that helps mitigate corruption and misrule. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mikhailis. Well, you should pay a lot of money for those sketches if you did it yourself, so they did you a favor. Now, we have 7 speakers on this. Yeah. First speaker is Mr. Edward Akajanian from Armenia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Irene. Dear colleagues, the title of current debate is the contribution of independent institutions and media in preventing and fighting corruption. And indeed, the proper institutions, and more specifically the media, have an irreplaceable role in fighting corruption. But with your permission, I would like to talk about the contribution of independent institutions and media in fostering corruption. As strange as it may sound, this is the topic that is most often discussed by the citizens of Armenia as of late, and I will elaborate on this shortly. My colleagues from Armenian delegation have mentioned about the institutional reforms that have taken place in post-revolution Armenia and the practical implications they have had on both the international image of the country as well as on the internal matters. However, the bigger part of the Armenian society is not satisfied with the pace of the anti-corruption reforms, to say the least. And coming to the initial question, which was about the way those same institutions, and namely the media, foster corruption, it so happens that in Armenia, approximately 80% of the media is controlled by oligarchs, who in turn happen to be representatives of former political elite, also known as the current opposition parties. And this situation creates objective dissatisfaction from society, which is well informed on the actual proprietors of those media, as well as about all the wealth that has been accumulated by the same elite throughout the past 25 years. And when a country finds itself in a transitional period from autocracy to democracy, the very independent institutions which are there to guarantee the rights and freedoms of all individuals and entities within a country are being exploited to the maximum by the agents who have long been in the positions of disregarding those very rights and freedoms. And when the democratic institutions are not holistically established yet, the government faces a challenge and a dilemma, having to choose between the short-term satisfaction of public expectations and the long-term formation of appropriate institutions. So far, our government has chosen the second path because we believe that democracy and democratic institutions prove their worth and resilience in the long run, and we do have enough political will to withstand the tides that will be coming and going till then. Here, once again, I would like to stress the crucial role of the support that Armenia has been receiving from several OSCE member states in its democratic reforms and anti-corruption agenda in the form of both financial and technical support. And we intend to further this cooperation with our international partners because the people of Armenia stand firm on their will to be a free and democratic society where the page of autocracy and corruption are far behind. Having said this, I believe that exchange of experience is of utmost importance for the OSCE member states. And dear colleagues, I openly invite you to look into the Armenian case as a very peculiar and interesting example of a country where often democracy is used to destroy democracy, and the role that political will and other factors play in preserving democracy in such a delicate situation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the time. It was only 3 minutes. Thank you. Second speaker is Mrs. Ruba Hook from United Kingdom, and she will be followed by Mrs. Anastasia Gara from Greece. Please, Mrs. Hook, the floor is yours.
When we come to the role of independent institutions and media in fighting and preventing corruption, I have to say yesterday we heard some people very uncritical of their nation states. Our friend from the Likud party in Israel, for example. I am not going to be the same today, particularly when we know that, gosh, only the other day a journalist was shot in the head in Israel. We do need an independent investigation to find out what happened there. So as I say, I won't be saying my country is perfect. The UK was responsible for so much colonialism and empire that I'm not going to be the kind of person who flies around the world causing emissions when we have a crisis, lecturing everyone else. Indeed, the Anglo-Saxon world witnessed Trump, and I fear that my own country is going down a very Trumpian slippery slope. Just overnight, I noticed that the Ministerial Code of Conduct for Standards in Public Service has been rewritten by Prime Minister Johnson. So the words honesty, integrity, and transparency have vanished, just at the moment when he is in a very tight spot with his own law-breaking, at the time when the most severe restrictions on people's liberties were placed throughout the coronavirus pandemic. So what's the role of the media in all this? Well, today, if you look at the newspapers, we claim to have a free media, but it's only free if you're able to have the millions to buy the means for promoting your message. So some of our newspapers are reporting the Queen's 70th anniversary on the throne. I mean, that's something we knew already, whereas the attempts to rewrite codes of conduct are far more serious. Apparently, now the Prime Minister will be judge and jury of any future law-breaking, which I find very worrying. We also know, look, other countries, I'm of origin of Bangladesh, that country there has not had contested elections for, gosh, I can't remember how long. And I know that a photojournalist, friend of my family, Shahidul Alam was only freed from jail when he took photos of student protests because of international pressure. So we, all of us in this room, can apply international pressure when needed. I could go on and on with examples from the UK. Our public broadcaster, Channel 4, which has been critical of the government and indeed replaced Boris Johnson with an ice sculpture when he failed to appear at a televised prime ministerial debate. As punishment for that, they are being privatised, so their critical news service won't operate anymore. The broadcast regulator in the UK has been hand-chosen by the government against independent advice. As I say, this could be a really long speech if I gave you lots of examples. So what I wanted to say in my last remaining seconds is that social media and citizen journalism did provide possibly a counterbalance to these big millionaire press barons. But even then, we see they are replicating the structures of the traditional media. When you have Elon Musk trying to buy Twitter, when you have Facebook that is controlled by Mark Zuckerberg, these millionaires, you know, they're becoming what they wanted to critique. And TikTok, who knows who owns that? I think the Russians or the Chinese or someone like that. So look, as I say, this could be a long speech. And sometimes, you know, our press in the UK, we say that it's free and fair. They're more interested in Amber versus Johnny than they are in the fact that our government has been dragged kicking and screaming into tightening sanctions on Russian oligarchs. London has long been known as the laundromat, the place to park dirty money if you've got a few millions. When I was a shadow minister in the UK Parliament, I was pressing our government to do more. Only belatedly, they have done too little, too late. So anyway, as I say, this is only meant to be short. I could talk about Chelsea Football Club, I could talk about many things, but I will not. And I would just say, see you all in July in Birmingham. I'm so sorry it's Birmingham, I'm a Londoner, I would not have chosen this place either. So my apologies now for Birmingham. But it'll be fun to see you all in the UK. Thank you very much.
We will be really happy to join you in the UK, even in Birmingham, yes. Thank you. Now, Mrs. Anastasia Gara from Greece, and she will be followed by Mr. Dragan Bojovic from Montenegro. Mrs. Gara, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to recite a quote by Jeremy Bentham, who said, "Publicity is the very soul of justice." In that sense, the role of the press is crucial in a system of checks and balances. A strong, independent press can be a vigilant guard against schemes of corruption and can also help to bring justice to those harmed by corruption. There is great concern lately in Greece, in my country, about the freedom of press and pluralism. During the past 3 years, Greece has dropped to 108th in the Media Freedom Index. National Councils for Media Report shows a shocking lack of political pluralism. Government handouts given to specific media, cancelling the license fee to broadcast paid by the TV owners are only some of factors that lead to the demise of press freedom. These kinds of initiatives are considered as efforts by the government to gain media immunity and buy out a stance of acute favoritism. The dire situation was recognized and raised in high concern by the Vice President of the European Commission, who leads the work on values and transparency. She said about disinformation, dependence of media, state advertising, the murder of an investigative reporter, etc. As I said, the situation is really dire. Action must be taken immediately to restore media freedom. We must create a just, fair, and transparent framework. In our media are stripped of their capability to question, check, and even oppose authority. Then corruption will be paired with authoritarian system, and that can lead us to a point of no return. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Gara. And the floor now, the next speaker is Mr. Dragan Bojovic from Montenegro, and he will be followed by Mrs. Monica Zalkova from Northern Macedonia. Please, the floor is yours.
First of all, many thanks once again for our dear and so kind host, Kyria Karalambadis, Eucharistume Parapolia Ola. I will try to be short and I will ask one concrete question, which I will formulate in this way. Who supervises those who controls or who should lead our fight against corruption, except media, of course? I will try to explain. We try to build independent institutions, agencies, prosecutors, police teams, etc., for prevention and for fight against corruption. In that sense, we try to build strong legislative and institutional framework to protect independency of this institution. But what in the case when that institutions are led by the persons which are by themselves corrupted, or let's say which are politically colored, for example, indirectly controlled by the ruling party, or which work in selective, unprofessional way? On the one side, we protect that institution and their independency, and that is good. But on the other hand, when we have problem in practice, we can't or we don't have direct operative mechanisms to make personal changes on the top of that institution, if those institutions, as I said, have been leading in wrong, unprofessional manner. It seems that in this way, we don't have any more three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial, which in democratic systems should control each other. But we have one more, fourth branch of power, which is out of any control. If we have unprofessional person, or in worst case, corrupted person, or person which does not show a willingness to fight corruption, or person which in some way cover up the corrupt actions of others, and if that kind of person is in charge in so-called independent anti-corruption institutions, then all society will have a big problem. If we, as parliamentarians, try to change something in that case, if we try to change legislation, if we try to remove that corrupted or unprofessional persons from that position before ending of their statutory mandates, and elect someone who would do the job really professionally, then we are usually attacked or condemned by some NGOs or some parts of public that we are jeopardizing the independence of this institution and that we are trying to exert political influence there. So we have some kind of circulus vitiosus, bad circle here. I think this is also one of the interesting problems for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bojovic. Now, next speaker is Mrs. Monica Zalkova from Northern Macedonia, and she will be followed by Mrs. Ripsim Grigorian from Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Mrs. Karalambades, dear keynote speakers, ladies and gentlemen, someone says that the biggest disease is corruption and the vaccine is the transparency. Corruption undermines democracy and human rights by infiltrating all layers of the society, so we know that the fight against this greatest social evil is neither rapid nor easy. Combating corruption requires collective actions by several institutions, civil society sector, and of course the media, and also by each individual. I will turn to my country. In the Republic of North Macedonia, several institutions are involved in the prevention and fight against corruption, such as the State Commission for Prevention and Fight Against Corruption, Public Prosecutor Office, Ministry of Internal Affairs, and other several institutions. Also, I would like to mention that the Republic of North Macedonia has jumped 24 places on the list of Transparency International for the fight against corruption, and the country progress report of the European Commission notes progress in this area for 2 years in a row. What is more proudly is that with the new law for prevention of corruption, We have strengthened the criteria for election of the composition of the State Commission, which is fighting with the corruption. And also in the election process of the members of this commission is not only the parliament included, but also the representative of the ombudsman, academic community, civil society sector, and journalists. In April last year, the Assembly adopted the National Strategy for Fight Against Corruption 2021-2025 and the Action Plan. Regarding the role of the media in preventing and combating corruption, I would like to emphasize the contribution of the media with their objective public information, investigative journalism, and the impact of the public opinion. As a part of our legislative oversight and representative function as a parliamentarians, we are expected to adopt enforceable anti-corruption legislations to effectively scrutinize the work of the governments, to empower independent institutions, and as well to promote the media freedom, and to encourage the journalists to conduct independent and responsible investigative reporting. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you for your intervention. And the next speaker is Mrs. Grigorian from Armenia, and she will be followed by Mr. Christian Vikinin from Bulgaria, who is our last speaker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dearest Irene Charalambidis. Honorable Madam President, colleagues, around a week ago, Armenia hosted an event co-organized by the Freedom House titled Armenian Democratic Forum. In his opening speech, Prime Minister Pashinyan stated that democracies around the world share similar challenges, one of them being the following phenomenon: when democratic tools and principles are used to destroy democracy. And I'm here continuing what my colleague Eduardo Gajanyan was telling about. For years, the regimes that existed in Armenia have tried to convince our people that democracy contains elements of weakness, that security is a priority for a warring country, and hence rights and freedoms such as the right of peaceful assembly, freedom of speech must be seconded to security. After the 2018 democratic, non-violent Velvet Revolution in Armenia, security was constantly opposed to democracy by the same forces, ex-regimes. And especially this was sharpened after the 2020 war launched by Azerbaijan against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. After the war, these same ex-regimes tried to reinforce a false thesis of the need to choose between democracy and security, saying that there was no democracy during their rule, but there was no war, and that in a democracy, the country's defense capacity has weakened. For months, the opposition political forces were calling for violence, staging political assassinations in the streets. There was an assassination attempt of the Speaker of the Parliament, and promoting the narrative of justifying violence in general. During those months, the police did not resort to use of force even once. Later, snap elections, parliamentary elections were held, which were assessed as free, fair, and transparent by virtually all the observers, and later on this was reflected in the respective reports. With this, we registered that encroachment on democracy can only be prevented by even greater democracy, strengthening the democratic institutions by making them more transparent, more accountable. Today's challenges that democracy faces in Armenia are closely related and are the legacy of the previous non-democratic corrupt regimes. Unfortunately, they cannot be overcome in a short period as they affect people's thinking, and it is difficult to get rid of ill practices easily. However, today we can state with certainty that in Armenia the most essential and the most important democratic institute is the Institute of the Citizen. The citizen who is the main beneficiary of democracy and at the same time the main actor in building and strengthening the democracy. So we believe that despite the complicated challenges we face, when there is political will, and as Irina Charalambidis said yesterday, I'm referring again to her, when there is political will, everything is possible. Thank you very much. And before I give the floor, I just want to thank also Ms. Anita Dimitriou, the Chair, the President of the House of Representatives of Cyprus, for organizing and hosting this important conference and equally amazing event in beautiful Cyprus, Levkosia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anita will be joining us later. Thank you. And our last speaker for today, Mr. Christian Vikinin from Bulgaria. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Karalambidis. Dear speakers, it was really a very interesting panel, and I just wanted to make some comments and maybe questions to Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Wild. First of all, I want to say that I have a great respect to you and to what people like you are doing, because sometimes media investigations are the last resort, the last opportunity to uncover corruption cases. I must also say from my own experience that cooperation between journalists and opposition politicians is also the only possibility to give more visibility to corruption cases, which otherwise would remain unnoticed. Third element, you mentioned that the globalization and internet created challenges with regard to financial and economic globalization, but also created opportunities for the international investigations. You mentioned that, and I think that is a possibility, and it is actually a very strong tool, because the access for information is much easier now. The challenge now is how to select the information, but it's much easier to get it now. There are results, I think, from what you're doing, only if there is a follow-up by the respective institutions. You mentioned some of these cases, but quite often is not the case. I just would want to focus on that, because without proper investigation and prosecution by the institutions, without an effective justice system, there is no follow-up. And by the way, from our own experience in my country, we see sometimes cases of official investigation, which is started on the basis of publications, but investigation that starts only to find no crime, just to kill the investigation, and then case is solved. And I think this is the most efficient way, actually, to kill such kind of media investigation. The problem I see also is that truly independent investigative media are small and not so influential and cannot produce real consequences in the public opinion if they are not supported by big media. And the problem is that often big media remain dependent on their owners. And concentration of ownership distorts overall the content of the media environment. So this is an issue that we need to somehow find a solution to. And I have just two questions. First, maybe more important, is what actually parliaments can do, because we discussed the role here. Are there maybe somewhere good practices? How can we help investigative journalists? And the second question is more philosophical, but how do you see, or how you solve some ethical issues, like the need to maintain links to criminal circles, for example, how the rights of those who are accused publicly are defended, especially when they have no chance to explain their story sometimes. I can give you an example, for example, with some journalists who have links to state security agency. I'm finishing, Irene. State security agency, which, or people within the agency are supplying information selectively just to attack certain businesses or people. This is distorting these investigative journalists, and also other cases when we have kind of fake investigative journalists who reach some informations and then start blackmailing the respective people. They don't publish anything if they are given money, for example. So, I mean, these are ethical issues that sometimes put a blame on all of you, and maybe there is some way to make a distinction between the real and honest people dealing with these issues and others who make profit out of this. Thank you very much.
Okay, Frank, would you like to respond to Mr. Vikinin's remark?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I think that's a really good point. It is, it is essential that journalists are also accountable, and there is, it's absolutely true that there is malpractice, and it's quite difficult to generalize because each country has its own sort of situation, and the independence of the media is not least a funding issue. And unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with the situation in Bulgaria to comment there, but I think there are a couple of things. I think there need to be pretty clear guidelines to which journalists can be held to account. And in terms of what you can do in Parliament, I think it's essential. So, for example, just going back to the UK, for instance, we were talking about these anti-SLAPP measures that are being discussed. A lot of the lawsuits are without merit, but they still damage the journalists. They still damage the target because they cost often millions, and they take up a lot of time. They trash someone's reputation. So I think each member of parliament can look at this specific situation in their country and can work to strengthen that legislation. So there are actually statutory protections against journalists.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. Drew, would you like to comment?
Sure. Quickly, some of the things that parliaments can do, I think number one is transparency. You indicated that you felt transparency was better, and in some ways it is. But fundamentally, on some of the core issues, it's not. It's good that we're doing some work with UBO, Ultimate Beneficial Owner, but unless those laws have enough teeth, they can be circumvented by using proxies and other things. So, the criminal services industry is there in the lawmaking rooms with you all, promoting, weakness in the law at all times. And so these laws really, transparency laws, really must be strong. Corruption, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The greater you shine a light, if we had access to everybody's bank accounts, we wouldn't have any corruption. So I'm a believer in extreme transparency, and I really think that we need to look at everything we're not making public and why is it not being made public. Secondly, I think we need to promote greater sophistication amongst both the investigative capacity in your law enforcement and in the prosecutorial offices and in the auditor's office. Organized crime is innovative. Think of Bill Gates who can kill. These are audacious people who are into cryptocurrencies and things that are way beyond your ability to regulate. You're 5 years behind regulation, maybe 10 years behind regulating organized crime and corruption. This has to move quickly, and that starts with having stronger investigative capacity. As Franz pointed out, I don't know how law enforcement does it sometimes. They have so little resources against such a serious problem, and they're really losing the battle in many ways. Most people who work in this industry will say that most crime that happens, we capture about less than 1% of it. Most crime works. The other thing you need to support is SLAPP lawsuits, as we pointed out. And then it's not up to you, but we need to find a way to jail people. If you look at banks around the world, they have done horrendous things. They have literally, paid billions of dollars out in settlements, and nobody has ever gone to prison at a bank, ever. This is just wrong. So there needs to be better corporate accountability laws in place to make sure that people pay the price for what they're doing. And then if you can investigate things as a body, you should investigate more. You should call some of these things in front of, call testimony and get people in front and tackle some of these issues, because it's the same problems over and over and over again, and that's a real problem. And as far as media being bad, I agree. There's propagandist media, there's oligarch media, there's corporate media, there's political party media. But restricting media doesn't solve the problem. What you need to do is enlarge the media sphere. There are plenty of good journalists out there, but most of the problem is that they can't operate. They can't keep, you know, if you have a job that pays you almost nothing and you're threatened all the time, and if you do your work, you could get killed, there's not a lot of people who want that job. And so consequently, the media must be protected and promoted. And then you'll find that there's more good people out there than there are bad people.
Thank you. Mr. Mikhailis, I think you want to comment on something.
On something that has been said. Of course, yes, all anti-corruption independent institutions should, in fact, be independent. You are right about that. And it's very important that they should be politically neutral. That's something that should be for all in the audit office, the law office, the prosecuting authorities, the police. I think that it's encouraging that I think 2 years ago, the European Union, the Commission has initiated a procedure through which it evaluates the rule of law in member states. And I think there was until now one report concerning this issue. I anticipate that these deficiencies in these institutions should be reflected in this report if there are any such deficiencies.
Thank you. Thank you for your reports, the speakers, and for your interventions, my colleagues. And now we can sum up with the closing session. Thank you, gentlemen. You can go back to your seats. Thank you all. I would kindly ask Ambassador Hassani and Mrs. Anita Ramasastri to come take their seats next to me, please. Dear colleagues, this is our final session. We will now proceed right away to listen to Mr. Hassani's closing remarks. Ingli, I cannot thank you enough for your very effective coordination of the first session and overall for your valuable contribution and cooperation. Your long experience and your commitment are important assets for the OSCE and for us, and you have the floor.
Dear Irini, let me also thank you for your commitment to organize such an event. As I said yesterday, when we met for the first time more than 3 years ago, you were continuously talking about this event, continuously willing to put parliamentarians, governments, civil society, but also other OSCE mechanisms into one table and to discuss. Unfortunately, COVID came in between us, but your dedication continued. I would like to thank you, thank the House of Representatives of the Republic of Cyprus, and definitely the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and Madam President. Thank you for all this engagement. The last 2 days' debates have confirmed once again how important it is not only to combat corruption. In all my work, I've never found a government that doesn't want to fight corruption.
At least to say.
In their open public statements, but the ways how we do it, that's a different story. And it's so important to be here today with you, dear Irini, as you, the special representative of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. It's very important to be with Ms. Ramasastri, the special representative of the political chair of the organization, and myself and my colleagues that represent the OSCE's secretariat, the executive part of our community, to see and develop what we can do and what we can achieve in order to make the best efforts to fight corruption. It's important to engage with the parliamentarians. The distinguished colleagues here are those that draft legislation back home and make our work in a way or another better. The colleagues here are probably future ministers, people that will have and that will create also the necessary environment for work. And even that the OSCE Secretariat deals with decisions that are taken by full consensus, I'm happy to see and happy to engage with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, because you have the niche of managing by several sets of majority to make resolutions that can make the difference and can also help the work of the OSCE Secretariat to develop thoughts and ideas in the future. We in the OSCE Secretariat base our work on consensual decisions that are legally binding for the 57 governments of the participating states of our organization. But if we engage better with you, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, we can create a good background that can help us in the future arrive in certain levels of cooperation. And the fight against corruption, as I said, is a very important pillar on this. I would like to emphasize something that has been repeatedly stated during the conference, the importance of cooperation between parliament, civil society, media, and also other institutions. I really I enjoyed very much the last session. Colleagues from the so-called other side are the ones that, honestly, whatever governments do, whatever parliaments do, whatever secretariats do, the fight against corruption has its best champions on media, on whistleblowers, on people that are outside of the system, and they see what is going on. And these kind of partnerships can consistently let us advance in our efforts in combating corruption and increase transparency. Let me also point out the crucial role of digital technologies and innovations in improving governance and in preventing and in combating corruption. Digitalization, open government platforms, and open data can serve as excellent tools to deal with the corruption risks and increase transparency. I've been traveling a little bit in the recent weeks. I've been, at least in the last 2 weeks, I was in Moldova and in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Both countries remind my own country 20 years ago. As civil servants, we suffer a lot to understand where our income is coming and how do we spend. And as soon as systems of digitalization come into place, as soon as we try to remove the human aspects of transparency, I personally believe that things can become better and better. I'm talking about countries, relatively small countries, like the ones I mentioned, and my own, where everybody knows everyone, or is a cousin of everyone. Therefore, we need to create systems to remove the human aspect of backgrounds and checks that can create even problems. We've heard from a number of speakers about the importance of having effective international mechanisms in place aimed at promoting good governance principles and addressing challenges associated with corrupt practices. International cooperation, including between parliaments, is a cornerstone to preserve democracy and integrity of public institutions. But multilateralism lately is suffering, and you know better than me what we're facing. It seems that the new world order seems to be perceived differently, and that should continue to increase our efforts to maximize the cooperation. OSCE is an integral part of the entire approach. The organization we work is dealing a lot with promoting international cooperation on economic issues, to strengthening good governance and assisting the OSCE participating states in combating corruption, money laundering, and the financing of terrorism. And I would like to use this opportunity to mention some of our projects and activities. We are assisting Ukraine in its anti-corruption efforts. We have currently a project on digital standardization of good municipal governance services in Ukraine that was launched last year and promotes data-driven and value-based approach in municipal governance with the aim to increase transparency and improve efficiency of local administration. This project is based mostly in municipalities in Western Ukraine, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to continue working on this project, even taking into consideration the current situation there. But we're also tailoring a project in Ukraine on cryptocurrencies and their use to avoid sanctions. This is one of the things that I think it's not only for the current situation in Ukraine, but also in other countries, can be something that we can work together. We provide technical support to Armenia. We offer technical and capacity building support to the newly established Anti-Corruption Committee of Armenia, which I think it's a story of success, including targeted support to enhance the capacities and effectiveness of this Anti-Corruption Committee to implement its essential operational functions. And I really hope we can look at the structure and develop in a much broader way. Engaging youth in dialogue and efforts to combat organized crime and promote the rule of law and good governance is more relevant than ever, as socio-economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic have made a substantial percentage of youth vulnerable to join criminal groups. Therefore, together with UN organizations, we work to enhance education and raise awareness of next generations on the fundamental role of rule of law in societies and how to fight organized crime, drug abuse, corruption, and their interlinkages. We have a project, the OSCE has a project on strengthening the fight against transnational organized crime in Southeastern Europe through improved regional cooperation in asset seizure, confiscation, management and reuse of these assets, and this project aims to improve the effectiveness of the fight against transnational organized crime and corruption in the OSCE region by building capacities and improving regional cooperation among 5 participating states of our organization: Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia. I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was in Sarajevo a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago, maybe. We have a hotel seized from the organized crime that we are aiming to use it as a place for refugees coming from Ukraine. That's a shelter for people in need, and why not use all these opportunities to help those that are getting out of the tragic war in Eastern Europe. And last but not least, the OSCE has a project in promoting good governance and a positive business climate in the OSCE region through digitalization and the use of open data, which is literally promoting the use of open data as a powerful tool for improving the business climate and supporting the economic recovery after the hopefully the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I really cross fingers if we are at the final phase of it. And as I said, to achieve our goals, the OSCE Secretariat works closely with other international organizations, and the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly remains one of our key partners. I wanted to share with you the mandate of my office. Mention it directly. We have to. My office has to deepen interaction with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in areas within the coordinator's competence, and I'm quoting. Therefore,
that's good. That's good.
This is exactly what we're doing. And dear colleagues, if I may, our debates in these 2 wonderful days have confirmed that parliaments absolutely play a crucial role and are one of the key elements for the successful promotion of good governance and the effective fight against corruption. As a guardian of democracy, each parliament is in charge of ensuring the state institutions, including parliaments themselves. So everything is transparent and accountable. Constructive expert assistance from the international community is important for overcoming this problem. The experience of the OSCE, as well as of other international organizations, can offer opportunities to the governments in the battle against this crime. Therefore, my office remains at your and your government's disposal. However, I'm sure, and I need no confirmation from Irini, because I think our discussions on this topic do not end here. And I would like to encourage all the colleagues here to reflect on ideas, recommendations stemming from this meeting, while trying to shape follow-up engagements and activities. I would also like to invite national parliaments to take the discussions and elaborations further, translating the conference's recommendations into political engagements aiming at reinforcing your commitments in the area of anti-corruption. And I was telling to Irini yesterday, this year is the 25th anniversary of the creation of the Office of the Coordinator for Economic and Environmental Activities in the OSCE. It's also the 25th anniversary of the creation of the representative on the freedom of the media. We were thinking and planning to organize a joint event with the representative on the freedom of the media. The anti-corruption is the natural, logical link of our 2 offices. Happy to do this all together. And whatever, as I said at the beginning, whatever we do, governmental agencies and intergovernmental agencies do, I think the real fighters of corruption are the ones that are brave enough to denounce it, and a chapeau to all journalists for their dedicated work into making our societies better. Idealism is always needed, and I followed carefully the question of our Bulgarian friend. I come also from similar experiences in my country, but as long as we have dedicated journalists able to make the difference, we will continue to be in good hands. To conclude, I would like to thank all the participants for your active engagement, and let me ensure that we look forward to working together with the parliaments and other actors to create stronger partnerships and cooperation to combat corruption. Dear Irini, thank you so very much. Dear Anita, always a great pleasure to cooperate together.
Thank you. It's a pleasure working with you, Ingli. Anita, I would like to thank you again for traveling all the way to Cyprus to be with us. Thank you also for your willingness to cooperate with the OSCPA to further promote the anti-corruption agenda. I do look forward in field missions with you. I think it will be quite interesting to work so close together. Synergies between the executive structures and the Parliamentary Assembly is in a position to bring added value to our goals. And now could you please provide some key highlights from the session?
Great. Thank you very much, Irene, and thank you all. And I think I would just echo Ambassador Hassani's remarks, which is that you are the people with the power and the ability, and we are here just as really tools and people to support your work and your priorities. So I hope that these different 3 branches of the OSCE, we will continue to cooperate. And I think, thank you so much for bringing us together. So just a few key highlights, really 5 key points. The first one is, and I think we heard it from the panel before, from Franz and from others, which is my key message back, which is it's all connected. The war, the pandemic, problems now with energy security, it all relates back to corruption. And now as we try to fix some of the problems, we have to reflect. And so my plea to all of you is in any of your other agendas, either as a big issue to deal with as prevention, is all of these commitments to corruption, or as you tackle these challenges, you address corruption in them. So that's my first message. The second one is we heard from many people today. I began my remarks, but we heard from many about the enablers. These are the lawyers, the accountants, the bankers, others. There is a policy agenda for all of us in each of your countries around this, and you have expertise here and elsewhere, Transparency International, all of these groups, willing to help you craft a policy agenda with these professional groups. It happens, and parliaments can at least convene the conversations to begin this discussion, because if you don't deal with those individuals, we're going to have a global problem that will persist. Third point, civil society is not only important, but you heard from Drew that they are the source of most of the evidence that law enforcement needs today because, to actually begin to investigate. So the OSCE can build a bridge between civil society and media and prosecutors and law enforcement and build bridges of trust. It's been done in a variety of places. In the US, there is a kleptocracy initiative where civil society has a seat at the table. It's really important. Fourth, SLAPP reform. Really, lawsuits that silence journalists and civil society organizations is a problem in all of our jurisdictions. It requires policy reform. It's in your hands, and it's very, very important. And then I think the last thing I would say is just, I hope there are opportunities both with the Parliamentary Assembly to help continue to make a parallel and consistent agenda with the executive branch and the OSCE. But the other piece is, I think, hopefully that we can engage bilaterally, nationally as well. That's my role serving the chair, is to be a resource for you. And again, as Ambassador Hassani mentioned, there's work relating to Ukraine. So some of the thinking that I've been asked to focus on, which I hope will help your national parliaments, is around the issue of how to deal with assets that are now frozen in your jurisdictions and what can be done with them. Many of your leaders have spoken about where they should go and how they should go once frozen. It's going to be complicated, so please do feel free to reach out. Thank you so much, and thank you again to the hosts for such a wonderful event.
Dearest Margarita, thank you, Anita. Thank you, Anita. Dearest Margarita, please could you join us, because I will ask you to say a few words to our colleagues. So until you get your seat next to Anita, some closing remarks on my behalf. Independent institutions are they're very important. So we have to guard them, because if in our countries cannot trust the independent institutions, then we will turn to international institutions to ask for help. That's the only way. We cannot do it otherwise. Now, people who are appointed to serve, they cannot be appointed by one person, because they will feel obliged to serve the person who appointed them and not the public. So we have really responsibility to guard and to change, in some cases, the way we appoint the people who are heads of the independent institutions. Now, the media, yes, of course, we do have to guard the media. And we can make legislations that prohibit interference in their work. And we have to make them effective. Now, Cyprus is a small island. Everybody knows everybody, so it's quite easy to pick up the phone and ask for a favor. We have to change our culture. We have to educate people. We have to teach them what conflict of interest is, why they shouldn't do that. We need fairness for all citizens and to feel that they are treated exactly the same way, no matter their position, no matter their financial status. So, Margarita, where is Margarita?
She's here.
Why didn't you join us?
I am joining you.
So, please. Please, the floor is yours. The President of the Organization of Security.
Hidden. Dear Iran, dear Vice President Irene, dear colleagues, it's a true pleasure to be here today. And I would like to start to say thank you to the Cypriot Parliament for hosting this fantastic event. And also thank you so much, Irene, for this conference. It has been fantastic.
Thank you for trusting us.
And I could see also here with all colleagues who are in the room, because I know when it's a conference, when it's the last minute, it's always very busy. So it's excellent to see all this engagement. Thank you once again. And I did know when I appointed you that you would do a fantastic job. And I am sure that this conference is not just a middle step, because we have already adopted supplementary items, making decision. Now it's the conference, and there will be more steps taken. And I am with you on this all the way, because it's important that we as parliamentarians take the lead. But I would also like to say thank you to all those who have arranged this conference, who are in the background, who have fixed and make things work out so proper as it have been. It has been amazing. And not least to our speakers. They have had really a high level in their speech and contributed to our work as parliamentarians. I think all of us have brought with us new ideas, what we can do in our position. But also to mention the cooperation with the governmental structure inside the OSCE family. We have a long period, long cooperation, of course, and I really appreciate it. I think it's, as was said here, of high importance that we work together inside the OSCE family, because there is a lot of challenges. And we have a good cooperation. What most of us parliamentarians think about is the election observation. That's really a success, where we work together with Odysseus. But there is also to mention a few other things. The countering terrorism, where Reinhold Lopatka, Vice President Reinhold Lopatka, is chairing the committee. There is also very good cooperation with the governmental structure, with the Migration Committee, which Vice President Christian Wigenen is chairing. It's also a fantastic cooperation, particularly when it comes to the human trafficking. And now there will be further cooperation with the countering cooperation with Vice President and the Special Representative Irene Chamberlain. I think this is really important and shows that the governmental structure and the parliamentarians can work together. And when it comes to Russia's war against Ukraine, there is also fruitful cooperation. I have taken part in several of the permanent councils meeting and also expressed our views and taking part in several discussions. I think that's very important that we stand united inside the OSCE family and do what we can to contribute to a peace, unstable peace inside, and that we take this responsibility as parliamentarians. And to be ready for the parliamentarian dialogue, I have appointed Vice President Reinhold Lopatka, a special representative when it comes to the parliamentarian dialogue, because we need to have also the parliamentarians to talk to each other. And that's a huge challenge, as we know that there is almost no dialogue on the governmental side. But back to the corruption, as what's mentioned here. And Irene, you really put forward all the important issues with the transparency, rule of law, free media, and civil society. I think these have been a fantastic issue. And also mention the need for international cooperation. Excellent, Irene. Very well done. And I would say here that what's mentioned from the former speaker, that corruption is globalized. It's nothing that's only in our countries. And this shows how important the multilateral cooperation is. And we as members of the OSCE Parliamentarian Assembly, with members from 57 countries, from Vladivostok till Vancouver, think about what we can do with cooperation to fighting corruption. And also in that way, in support for the free media. And Irene, you are a journalist in your profession, so you know everything about this and how important it is with the international network as well. So let's continue this very important work. And what I also would like to say, civil society, your colleague, Kyriakos Argianis is special representative on the civil society, and this is also a very important part when it comes to the anti-corruption. So I think we are very well fitted inside OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to adapt to this important fight. And also thanks to you, Irene, with the code of conduct which you are taking forward and will continue to do. I think that's a way for us to show not only that we are saying corruption should stop, we are also acting. And by this, dear colleagues, I say thank you so much for this conference, and I say also thank you to UK, because we will soon meet again for the annual session. It will be fantastic, and my last word is, as always, thank you to the OSCE PA Secretariat, because you are the ones who is doing the hard work inside the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, dearest Margarita, our kind president of the Organization of Safety and Security in Europe Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you, Margarita. Thank you, thank you, thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting me above all. Now, dearest colleagues, it's been a pleasure to have you here in Cyprus these 2 days. I really wish we had more time together. I'm looking forward to see you all in Birmingham. Of course, the Cyprus journey is not over yet. We have a long day today, and I hope you will love every single minute of it. So, let me say that we are done for today, for this conference. Meet you all in Birmingham. Thank you for coming to Cyprus. Please take the best memories with you. At least we tried. Thank you, the Secretariat of the Cyprus Parliament, who really worked extremely hard to make pleasant your stay in Cyprus. Also, our colleagues in Vienna, in Copenhagen, the Secretariat of OSCPA. Thank you all. Hope you feel all the same way we do. See you in Birmingham.